Good evening. We are very happy to be together again. This is our seventh webinar, again, Oracle program. We will discuss about newest, the most technologies and innovations. Today, our topic is Monovision. Monovision is one of the most common presbyopia correction, but still there are a lot of challenging points. Our first speaker is Karl from USA, and we will listen him. Monovision works, but patient selection is key.
All right. Hey, I'm great to be with this rockstar lineup, and I really appreciate the fact that we have this time together. And primarily, I'm going to call Monovision the not so ugly stepsister of presbyopic correction. My disclosures are I work for a lot of different companies, a lot that we'll talk about, but I'll try and be equal in sharing. So I like to start off with what I want you to learn from my part of the lecture is Monovision is a great option. If you have a patient that's starting with Monovision, whether it's in contact lenses or maybe they had LASIK before, I think you want to think hard before you want to try and improve on that. And we have so many new options. One that Graham's going to talk a little bit more about. I'm going to kind of introduce just a little bit that make Monovision even better than it's ever been. So who should have Monovision? Well, first we want to look at your hobbies and your habits. So that's one of the first questions I ask. And I said, I don't want to know your job title. I want to know what you do. Do you sit at a computer? Do you drive a truck? Do you fly an airplane? Do you play golf? Are you really good at it? Are you a 5-0 tennis player? So I need to know that before I can kind of figure out, if Monovision is going to be an option for you. So when I did my brother's LASIK, I did Monovision. When I did my sister-in-law's refractive lensectomy, I did Monovision. When I did my mom's cataract surgery, I did Monovision. And when I had LASIK performed by Mickey Gordon, I had Monovision. So I'm Plano -1, works exceptionally well for me. And I'll tell you the nuances and the pluses and minuses for me. Now, for some of us, binocularity is somewhat sacrificed. I was coaching the little 10-year-olds baseball team. So when I first came back after LASIK, it took me a little bit to get that depth of focus, depth of field aligned again, but I think it wasn't very long. And I don't play serious golf, but I play a lot of golf and I play, other sports that require a lot of depth perception. I hunt, those kind of things. And it really doesn't affect me in the long range. But there are certain people that just can't tolerate Monovision. So if you're a 4 or less handicap on the golf course, I doubt you're going to tolerate that. If you're a 5-0 tennis player, I doubt you're going to tolerate that. And on average, it's about 1.5 diopters that patients will accept. And we've got data to support that I'm going to show you in a minute. So let's talk about the science for just a second. We've had a lot of studies that Monovision and pseudophakia performs very well at the 90 to 95% or a plus level. I think that there are a lot of pitfalls. This is a great CRST article that was from Tim Snyder a few years back. Some of the top 10 pitfalls, patient selection is important. You got to talk about reduced binocular vision. You got to talk, maybe for me now, I painted my walls whiter and I've got a lot brighter lights in my office, so that helps. I have not converted to readers yet, but I think patients need to know that they'll probably still use them for certain things. And you've got to figure out what is their exact amount that they like. And I think, contact lens trials are awesome for that. And if it doesn't work, you've got to think about the process of an enhancement or how are you going to touch that up. I talk about stereo acuity and depth perception, those people that I think is important, whether it's their hobbies or their habits. You can kind of say maybe it's a higher cost for surgeons, but my current enhancement rate for the group that I'm going to talk about, which is over about 2,000 or 3,000 patients, is 1.6%. So I think if you look at higher costs, I don't know if that's a great argument. And then there's compromise with Monovision. We discussed that. This just came out in Nature, and basically, it doesn't really appreciably alter visual processing. Eye movements maybe a little bit are limited on certain arrays, but realistically, for the most part, the science is showing that it still works well, all these years later. And Dr. Marshall and I were making the comment earlier that this has been around for a long, long time. So it's not something new. And almost every ophthalmologist that we know, he or she will say, that I do some sort of Monovision, whether it's a mini Monovision, that's a true Monovision. People defocus all the time. So my personal results in my study start off with a study that Faulkner and I did quite a while ago. We presented the Hawaiian Eye, and we showed that certain patients prefer their dominant eyes and other patients prefer their non-dominant eye to be the reading eye. Classic example, Michael Mrochen's good friend of mine, Kai Kazarian, likes to have his eye that's dominant for near. Now, his home office is right next to where he walks around in the kitchen, where he walks around in the bedroom. So he really feels like, you know, my dominant eye for my near eye is much better for me. But for the most part, about 73% in our study, the patients preferred their dominant eye for distance and their non-dominant eye for near. But it's really important to figure that out. And one free, easy way to do that is with the contact lens trial. I have 500 physicians that refer into me. We talk to them about how they can do a contact lens trial to help me better serve their patients. If I have challenges with them, I have about 5 optometrists that I specifically refer to that will pretty much nail the number for me. And when we looked at these numbers, about -1.5 was pretty much the target for everybody. When you're getting in the -2.25 and 2.5 range with a true monovision, we're having some other limitations. So what about my practice? Well, I have a pretty premium IOL practice. In fact, a lot of the patients I operate on are people that I previously did radial keratotomy or LASIK or PRK on back in the 90s. They're coming back now. My enhancement rate right now is about 1.6% for this group. And we do a lot of premiums. And these are my 1-hour visions. So again, this group is a 5 to 40 diopter lens with up to 6 diopters of astigmatism. So it's not the easy peasy lemon squeezies, as I say. At the 1-hour visit, they're seeing 94% or 20/30 or better. And that's kind of what some of my patients who've had LASIK before are kind of expecting. And they don't want to come back for a touch-up. So if I can look at them and say 98% you're going to walk away and I'm not going to have to alter this, I think that's a great. So this is just some Eyehance data. We just started putting the Eyehance lens in. We just had it available. I was one of the first to put it in North Carolina, and that was just a couple months ago. We've done close to about 100 now. And so I tell everybody whenever they use a new lens, see what platform it's on and go back to that platform before. So like when I'm looking at the Aura for these patients, I'm looking at the Tecnis ZC Boo, and I kind of look at those numbers in comparison because as I said, a lot of my patients have had previous surgery that I'm working on. We've shown this Eyehance lens, and a lot of papers have been shown that it's a great monovision IOL, but you're going to get about a -0.5 in my hands out of that. And so if we look at the type of thing, we're just changing the power from the periphery to the center. It's not a visual thing that you can see under the microscope. It comes in 5 to 34 diopter lens at half diopter increments, and it comes up to a level of astigmatism, which we're going to run across for the most part. I think that the quality of vision still for the one-piece ZC Boo is better, obviously, if you look at the modulation transfer functions. And if you look at the defocus curves, you're basically going to get about a half a diopter out of this, but the patients appreciably notice that they can see more intermediate with this. And we're really not selling this lens as a premium IOL. This is pretty much my standard lens. I do the dominant eye first, if that's the one that I'm targeting distance. And then I say, where are you at? Give me something where you want to be. You want to see the shade? Do you want to see your computer? What are you missing? And then we may target defocus based on that. The Bausch lens is another lens that a lot of people are using to improve depth of field and depth of focus at intermediate near. I don't have a lot of experience with that lens. I haven't used a Bausch lens for quite some time, but I just mentioned it for fullness sake. The VII IOL, I probably put in about 1,500 of these so far. I'm getting about 20/20 at distance, about 20/20/25 at intermediate, about 20/32 at near. There is a visible change on the surface of the lens, and I think that using Purkinje images, you need to center that lens. It is a forgiving lens, and I think it works very well in patients with previous refractive surgery. It is limited for us in the United States between 15 and 25 diopters. So some of those patients that are higher myopes with longer eyes or shorter eyes and hyperopic prior to me working on them maybe before, or maybe they were refractive lensectomy now, are limited, and I can't use this lens in those. This is a great new lens. We're about to start using it. It just came to the US market for us. My good friend Graham Barrett, who's also on the line, is kind of the brainchild behind this lens. It comes in a wide range of lenses from 10 to 30. Unfortunately, at this present time, we don't have astigmatic correction, but that's soon to come. There's a positive spherical aberration in the center, which is a little bit different. But this is really a lens that's designed for monovision. It's going to give you a true defocus of probably about -1.25 if you target plano. And if you look at the modulation transfer function on it, you get a nice blended vision. And that's why I like to talk about bilateral vision when we're talking about these lenses, because This lens is going to give us more of an intermediate, as opposed to, say, an old monofocal kind of setup like I did in my sister-in-law, where you may have ZC booths in each eye, and you have the one eye defocus for a -2, 2.25, which is what she was wearing her contact lenses, but you can physically see her move her head to try to find her sweet spot. Well, this new EMV lens is going to keep us from having to do that. And I think it's an awesome lens. Unfortunately, I can't give you any information about it because I don't have any personal experience, but I'm hoping that Graham will share that with us. The light adjustable IOL is great. It's 100% enhancement rate, but it's got great outcomes in terms of those patients that we touch up. So we can pretty much let them try out what they're going to wear in terms of their vision for a couple of weeks, and then we can lock that in later. I think that you can enhance these patients to their level of happy. So I think that it's another step. You're again enhancing 100% of these patients. And right now with a 1.6% enhancement rate, it's kind of hard to sell that for me. It adds a lot of chair time and a lot of work in the clinic, but I don't want to denigrate that technology. What about future IOLs? We were part of the clinical trial for the IC8 lens. The patients are some of the happiest patients I see. If we look at some of these defocus curves, Damien Gatinel, who's also on the line, has shown us a lot of these quality images as well. And you get good quality with the IC8. And you can target that monovision eye, whether that's their dominant or non-dominant eye, to minus about 0.75 diopters. They still see great at distance. In the clinical trials, we made their dominant eye, their distance eye, and we used a standard lens in that eye, whether it was an astigmatic correcting or a monofocal lens. Lens alignment for this does not matter. So if it rotates, we're not going to lose anything. You get about 1.5 diopters of astigmatism with this lens. So I think it's a great option. I think it works well. My friend Bernard Dick has shown us that in the multiple RK incision patients, a lot of those patients are very happy with this style of lens. It reduces some of their aberrations that they have post-surgical. And I think that they're very happy. So 95% of our patients were very happy in the clinical trials. The two that really weren't happy were basically, they were 20/20 at distance, intermediate, near. They saw everything, but they saw some diminution of their vision in the eye that had the IC8. I always leave with this, and this is my next to last slide. The top 4 reasons why people are unhappy after cataract surgery is dry eye disease. Please look for it. It's simple. Use lissamine green, use an OSDI or some type of speed reading. Epiretinal membranes are about 10 to 15%. If Donenfeld will always say this, if you find it before surgery, it's the patient's problem. If you find it after surgery, it's your problem. Postoperative refractive error, like I said, in about 1.6% of my cases, I'm touching those patients up and I talk to them about it. And then it's very important. Now we have all these choices of lenses that we find the right lens for the right patient. Thank you very much.
Very, very nice talk. Thank you so much, Karl. Now we have 10 minutes panel discussion. First of all, I would like to ask our panelists if there is any question. I would like to start with Suphi. Suphi, do you have any question, any comment?
That was a wonderful presentation. Thank you, Karl. I couldn't agree more. I love monovision, or maybe blended vision would be a better term. What do you think about the term blended vision? Because patients are supposed to see with both eyes at the same time. Or what
I think blended vision is perfect. And I actually use that in the clinic every single day. I think that it's a more appropriate term because, when we think of monovision, we're talking about a true defocus of maybe plano and -1.5 or higher. And with blended vision, you can talk about a -1/4, -1/2, -75. So I think, the Eyhance is, in my hands, about a -1/2 defocus. The Vivi's about a -75. I think if I go above that, I get some aberrations associated with that lens. And I think with Graham's new lens, you're getting about a -1, 1.25. And then you can blend that and still maintain binocular distance visual acuity, which is blending that intermediate, which is great. I love that term.
Yeah. Also, Michael, you have monovision, right? How do you feel?
Yes, I was my whole life about -2 myopic in both eyes, and about 3-4 years ago, I decided to correct my dominant eye for plano with LASIK, and throughout the day, I'm extremely happy, even with 2 diopter of anisometropia. But if I get tired or, under, poor light conditions, I can see quite a lot of halo and glare. And one thing I think every surgeon should consider to put in his informed consent is if you lie trying to read a book or looking on your phone, and I look on my left side, which then the pillow covers my dominant eye. My not dominant eye can nicely see the phone, can nicely read on the book. If I lie on the other side, I cannot read. So it's impossible to, so I recognize the difference. So, if people are sensitive on difference, I think they will recognize it, and I can understand it. It will, cause confusion. But personally, I'm very happy, but I would like to have a solution where I would have a little bit better distance on my non-dominant eye and still having the benefit of the near vision. We're probably adding some spherical aberration is probably a pathway to go.
So I also, I'm sure John has some comments.
Well, I agree with you. Patient selection is absolutely the most critical thing, but I also noted that you're not doing too large a differential. And thank God the cortex is designed to de-blur images. So I think Sophie got it absolutely right in terms of blended vision. By de-blurring, the cortex will bring those two back together, and for the vast majority of individuals, it's great. The major complaints that we've had over the years at Moorfields is really night driving. So I guess that's a major consideration when you're doing patient consultation. But right patient, not too big a differential between the eyes, terrific.
So Karl, my question, what about LASIK? We also, maybe you mentioned, maybe I missed, when we, how percentage you are doing monovision, your LASIK patients? When there's the myopia, of course, what is your approach? How is?
So pretty much all the patients that come in have a monovision trial. So we're trying to get more and more of the optometrists to where, for LASIK particularly, where they're going to be a quarter, a half, a 3/4, a 1, a 1.5, the true monovision, as I call it, or blended vision. And I think that is the key ticket. Now, where that gets a little bit challenging is in the cataract patient. So depending on the level of their cataract, are they going to really benefit by that? And so that's where you run into a little bit of, and that's where I'm a bit excited about Graham's lens, is because I'm going to be able to give them the opportunity to have 6/6 vision, but I'm still going to be able to blend that. So I can do, in my hand, say their dominant eye first, or the eye that I'm going to do distance, and then I can blend that vision -1/4, -1/2, -1, and that can give me up to about 2.25 diopter of difference between the two eyes. The only challenging patient that I still see is that hyperopic patient, that's got a prolate cornea. And so they've already got a very positive Q value. So if I'm adding positive spherical aberration like this EMV lens is going to do, is that going to be a problem? Or do I still have to use a lens that's spherical, like an MA60 AT or something like that? Because I still see a lot of prolate corneas that we created that are coming in with a spherical lenses with negative asphericity, and they're not real happy at all.
Mm-hmm. So,
Michael?
Karl, a question. So, you're a long time in the field, and if you treat young patients, let's say mid-end 20s, and you treat them for emmetropia, do you we're playing now about the presbyopia, and then how do you manage them? Are you doing monovision, or what is your solution when they're getting into their 40s and suddenly recognizing that they're getting maybe even earlier presbyopia?
Yeah, it's that classic, I'm going to give you the car when you're 14, and maybe you guys, it's a different story. We say at 16 you get a drive, but at 18 you guys get a drive there for obviously good reasons. But I think for the most part, I talk to my 35 and above crowd. And so I can tell you what I did myself. I was a -5 in both eyes. I left 5 in my right eye, and then I went 475, 4.5, 4.25, 4. And when I got down to 375, I couldn't tolerate that. We try to do that in all the patients that are 35 and above. Now, where it comes a little bit challenging is that latent hyperope. And so if you're doing hyperopic LASIK and you've got that latent hyperope and you cycloplegic that person, I had a person that was +3 manifest, +6.5 cycloplegic. And his hobby, what he did for a living was he drove NASCAR. So he drove around the track at 195 to 200 miles an hour around the track. And his line was, what do I do when I lose a contact lens at 200 miles an hour with 43 of your favorite friends riding right next to you? So we ended up doing a lensectomy in him, and he's still doing great. Now, I didn't do blended vision. We did a little bit so we could still see the dashboard in that, but kind of like, I'm like John Marshall. There's only so much, the cortex can handle. And we showed that to him in a contact lens and all that before.
That NASCAR driver, I think that's the ideal situation to treat Teo if you had ever driven with him.
Graham, I have a question for Graham. Graham, do you have a comment on if these patients are okay to get your lens that have had previous hyperopic LASIK?
Quite honestly, we don't know yet.
Okay.
It's not a huge amount of positive spherical aberration. I think it will depend on how much there is in that post-LASIK patient. I'm sure there are some people we should avoid it. The reality is most hyperopic LASIK today is done at the +1, +2, maybe 3 max. In the old days, there were much higher amounts done. So I suspect in the +2 hyperope, and in fact, there's not that much hyperopic LASIK being done.
Right, I agree.
Lens injections replaced it. But I would be wary if I saw someone, say, from 20 years ago who had a +5 corrected. Yeah. And I'd stay clear, to be honest.
So I think we need to move next speaker.
I would first like to thank the Committee of Oracles of Eye Innovation for this invitation. Here is my financial interest. The combined correction for hyperopia and presbyopia is an elective indication for corneal multifocal correction surgery. Classic monovision is usually reserved for the surgery of presbyopic myopes. In this presentation, we will see what separates but also brings together these two approaches. Let's begin with an example for which multifocality was not considered satisfactory by the hyperopic presbyopic operated patient. Despite a high gradient of concentric corneal curvatures, the uncorrected distant visual acuity of this eye was 20/20, while the uncorrected near vision was just Jaeger 8. We can underline to begin with that the actual curvature map is not the best to appreciate corneal multifocality. It is preferable to use the refractive corneal power map, which is produced using a ray tracing technique based on Snell's law. It represents the divergence of the local optical power of the anterior cornea. While we observe a large gradient of curvature between the center and the edges, and the corneal asphericity is prolate, and this corneal surface generates a high rate of negative ocular spherical aberration. What can well explain the poor uncorrected near vision? We can only really answer this question by studying the total refractive power map of the eye, the OPD map provided by the OPD scan instrument. The multifocality of the whole eye is represented in intelligible form for the clinician thanks to a map which represents the distribution of the optical power or vergence within the pupil for a distant target. In the present case, the multifocality relates to a power gradient between low myopia, insufficient for near vision, and moderate hyperopia. The hyperprolate modulation of corneal asphericity is of no use if it is not carried out concomitantly with central myopization. This point has long remained misunderstood by many surgeons in the past. It was long believed that it was enough to manipulate the corneal asphericity to effectively increase the depth of field, and this clinical example is precisely derived from this approach. As shown in the diagram on the right, for an eye rendered emmetropic or presenting low myopia, as shown in this clinical example, there is no interest in inducing hyperprolate asphericity, since this will induce hyperopic defocus towards the periphery. On the other hand, one can conceive of interest for an oblate aspherization, which can increase the depth of focus of an emmetropic eye. Some surgeons had, however, made the empirical observation that the more they aspherized the cornea by making it more prolate, the more it was necessary to overcorrect hyperopia, that is, enter more diopters to be corrected, than was necessary for restoring an aided far vision. Here is an example of successful multifocality, because unlike the previous example, the refraction is frankly myopic in the central region of the pupil. The hyperprolate asphericity generates negative spherical aberration, which gradually reduces the importance of this central myopization towards the edge of the entrance pupil. Here is another example of effective multifocality for the non-dominant eye. It is not on the corneal topography that one can see it, but on the Vergence map, which reveals a zone of central myopization sufficient to induce a good unaided visual acuity for the near, whereas this myopia decreases rapidly towards the periphery of the pupil to improve uncorrected distance visual acuity. When the cornea is highly prolate, the important flattening reduces sufficiently the angle of incidence of peripheral rays to revert the physiological plus sign of spherical aberration, which becomes negative. This makes it possible to conjugate with the retina the rays coming from distant sources, which cross the periphery of the cornea, and the rays coming from close sources, which cross the central paraxial region of the cornea. Multifocality aims to induce better uncorrected far visual acuity than the classic monovision, thanks to the pupillary periphery, which is emmetropic. Now, this central region is the one that determines the value of subjective refraction for human eyes. For this reason, it is best to use this approach for the non-dominant eye. This is a point in common with classic monovision. The comparison between the simulated retinal images for a distant target of two non-dominant eyes obtained after classic monovision at the top and monovision with multifocality at the bottom is eloquent. With regard to the dominant eye, a reverse strategy can be implemented. A less prolate or more oblate asphericity is induced to increase the positive spherical aberration, which gives the eye a peripheral myopic defocus capable of increasing the depth of focus. Here is an example of a global refractive map of a dominant eye operated on to improve distance vision. The refraction is under the influence of the paracentral Vergence values and is therefore emmetropic postoperatively, but the periphery is slightly myopic to extend the depth of field towards the intermediate vision. But let's come back to the characteristics present in the non-dominant eye after corneal multifocal surgery. Beyond the marketing efforts to differentiate these strategies, they all have a common base. In all these techniques, the zone dedicated to near vision is in the center, it's a myopic area, and the zone dedicated to far vision is on the periphery, as confirmed on these Vergence maps. In classical monovision, the difference is that the myopic area is distributed over the entire pupillary surface. In all these techniques, The ocular wavefront analysis will show an increase in negative spherical aberration. Current excimer lasers do not make it possible to deliver corrections with a dioptric gradient. They do not make it possible to modulate the rate of spherical aberration either. However, some platforms allow the induction of a particular corneal asphericity. The surgeon must either rely on a black box or determine which asphericity to induce to obtain the correct optical gradient. We have carried out work aimed at determining the optimal rate of spherical aberration to induce a power gradient with central myopia and rapid degradation of myopia in the periphery. For this, it is necessary to convert the phase error into dioptric error. We then realized that for a 6 mm pupil, a negative spherical aberration wavefront error of 0.4 microns for a 6 mm pupil, shown here in orange, induces a power variation of about 2.5 diopters between the center and the edges of the pupil. This is shown here in blue. Hence, on a non-dominant eye, to fully benefit from a 2.5 diopters addition with multifocality, the surgeon has to target a refraction of minus 2.5 postoperatively and alter the Q to get a variation of 0.4 micron of spherical aberration. The next challenge is to determine which asphericity change is necessary to change spherical aberration by an amount of minus 0.4 micron on a 6 mm pupil. We have published these results in the JRS, and the answer is that a change of about minus 0.6 for the Q value toward increased prolateness would work for most positive hyperopic and presbyopic power correction. Results of this approach have been published, and we have shown that compared to classic monovision, we had better uncorrected near with the dominant eye and better uncorrected distance with the non-dominant eye. This approach has been implemented since in the EX500 excimer laser under the read correction option. The read option concerns the presbyopic, emmetropic, or hyperopic eye and allows the planning of the non-dominant eye specifically. The read option enables the surgeon to program the laser accordingly on the non-dominant eye to achieve what is necessary to gain near vision and gain more uncorrected distance vision than with classic monovision. The use of the read treatment module automatically generates an addition for near vision, which is added to the correction of hyperopia for far vision, as well as an optimized variation for the asphericity of the cornea, previously measured with a topographer connected to the laser. In conclusion, the difference between a monovision and multifocal correction technique on the non-dominant eye concerns the extent of the myopic refraction zone in the pupil. It is extended to the entire pupillary zone for monovision techniques and restricted to the center of the pupil for multifocal techniques, as shown here on these real-life examples. For the dominant eye, the same principles, but reversed, can be applied to induce emmetropic refraction, but increase the depth of field thanks to the peripheral mild myopization. In all cases, it appears that to induce a useful depth of focus, it is necessary to induce a selective myopization of the center for the non-dominant eye or of the edges for the dominant eye. I recognize that this finding is less exciting than the generic names of presbyopia correction modules promoted by laser companies. With this presentation, I hope to have demystified the principles involved in corneal multifocality in Presby LASIK and shown its relationship to monovision. I thank you for your attention.
Thank you so much, Damien. Very, very nice presentation. So,
Thank you.
is there any comment this wonderful presentation, Michael?
Go with John first.
Okay, John.
I just thank you for a very nice presentation. Given the pupil size in the real world for many of these patients, a 6mm model is good, obviously, to start from. But how real is the effect in an individual with a 3.5mm pupil, or yourself on the sunny side of the swimming pool? Is it really significant?
Well, it's a good question. We need to standardize a bit. So we did the theory, the math, and we applied this into practice on this pupil diameter, because I agree that most people have, especially in the presbyopic age, smaller pupil than when they were younger. But we have empirically noticed that when we do this aspherization, there is still, and we have published this, better distance vision, at least in our office condition, illumination, where probably the pupil gets a bit more dilated because we work in dim light condition. And then when they have pure monovision, that is when you just target -2 or -1.5. So we believe that if there is a small pupil, the aspherization may still work a bit at the edge of the 3.5-4mm pupil. And but pupil dynamics, I think, should be, of course, taken into account for those corrections. And probably we should customize this. With my mentor, Dimitri Azar, 20 years ago almost, we had a patent with Harvard on how to customize multifocal correction given the pupil dynamics, even when the pupil was not concentrically shifting. But at that time, companies came back to us and said, you know, it's too complicated for doctors, so we'd rather still cope with asphericity changes. So at some point, you have to do something which you can put into practice. So we work with the Q value, but of course, what would be probably the next step is just to say, I want this area to be with this power, this area to be with this power. Select the diameter you wish, depending on the pupil dynamics, which you can measure easily. Even if the pupil does not concentrically constrict, you can use that shift to even increase further your customization and try that. But laser company wants something simple and stupid, so we do something simple and stupid.
Yes, Michael.
John or Damien, maybe I can comment it from a little bit different perspective. We just completed our multi-center European clinical trials for Allotex with 6-12 months follow-up and with some initial 3 years follow-up. And you know, in difference to what you do with the laser, we're actually adding tissue, human donor tissue, to create a change in the spherical aberration. And the concept optically is exactly the same what you're doing with Q value for the laser. And what we did is the patient's pre-op had quite a strict protocol, which was exactly the same like used for revision optic in the US for the FDA trials. So pre-op, their near vision had to be below 20/40, and their distance vision had to be 20/20. And post-op, we have 95% of 20/40 and better, and we have almost 80% in 20/25 or better near vision. So trying to answer your question, John, doesn't work. You're not altering the distance vision or very little, but you're gaining about 5 lines in in near vision at about 40 centimeters. And we pick up intermediate distance of about on ETTS charts. And on the loss we're getting for uncorrected distance, we had about 5 letters of loss. So you get a bit of a loss for distance, but you're getting a massive gain for the near. And that's for the monocular situation. For binocular, there was no change in distance. Again, a significant pickup in intermediate and about 5 to 6 lines in near vision. And the optical concept, you're looking at your topographies, your wavefronts, it's the same optical concept.
Yeah.
Of course. No, the point is, if you have multifocality which is successful, there must be somewhere in the pupil distribution of the power a myopic area to conjugate some special frequencies with the retina, else it will never work. But that has caused a lot of issues that doctors did not recognize this initially, because some doctors believe that if you make the cornea prolate, it will work. But it works only if the pupil is myopic in the center when the cornea is prolate, and vice versa. If you have an oblate cornea, this will work only if you have paraxial emmetropization. Interestingly, some IOLs have sectorial designs like the M+, and they have the same concept, but instead of doing it concentrically, they do it like a vertical inferior asymmetry, but still it's an area of the pupil which brings some myopia. But that's not very sexy to say. I mean, people prefer like terms like enhance something, or if you say I induce myopia somewhere, it's like, well, it's that's why this seminar is very right on target. It's the ugly sister of monovision. I would say that monovision seems like an old technique, but even the newer technique are still a derivation of monovision, a localized monovision, let's say.
So Damien, what is your retreatment strategy? So let's say a patient comes back, he's completely unhappy, he's disturbed by his vision, not what he expected, so now you created on the cornea with a laser, you created let's call it multifocality or asphericity. So what is your fallback position to get the patient back to excellent vision?
That's a good question, because I have seen also, I've been referred, this is why I can show some images of supracore, all other techniques. Sometimes all techniques have their failures, and it's interesting to analyze them and to try to fix them. Well, I think when the patient comes to you, it's very interesting that you see this divergence map, which you can have also with the eye trace system. So it's a map in dioptric power units, which shows you how the refraction is distributed throughout the pupil, and you can understand most of the time the subjective refraction, the discrepancy with objective refraction, and sometimes the complaints of the patient. And then you can still try to understand if it's a defocus issue, that is there is too much myopia, so the distance vision is too compromised, or there's not enough myopia and the near vision is not good enough, and then you can fix it the way you need. But I would, it's difficult to give you a thing. What I like is LASIK surgery, because LASIK is fantastic in terms of enhancement and adjustment capacity. This is why it will remain my favorite technique of all corneal surgeries, because as also Karl said, we see now, because we are aging, I can see patients who were like me, young and healthy when they were just myopic, and now they're early presbyope and they want an enhancement, and I can lift a flap 20 years later and fix it. So I like the LASIK approach, and I always warn the patient that there is a room for enhancement with this technique, whether it will be after 3 months or 3 years or even 10 years. And I always explain them that in LASIK surgery, doing an enhancement at 3 months, it should not be regarded as a failure. It's like a good. On the other hand, it's a nice option that they have with this technique, because it's like when you do something precise, it needs sometimes a little enhancement, and that's what I would do.
I think
it's a case by case.
We should also remember the pharmacologists are sort of banging on our door, And pupillary constriction is another potential solution here that gets rid of all these wonderful optical problems, because you just make the pupil smaller and smaller, and it's eminently reversible. So I just threw that in, that we are up against pharmacologists moving in big time.
Mm-hmm. True.
Suphi, any questions, or Graham, comments?
I was very interested. It was a very elegant explanation. I guess some of the companies are doing something very similar, Damien, like Presbyopia or the Schwinn.
No, it's always.
But they
I can
don't
tell
tell
you
exactly what they do, but something very similar.
No, but some they say, no, we don't induce myopia. So I'm always puzzled by this thing. I say, how can you there's a problem here, because if you want the retina to see a reasonably sharp image, you must have rays coming from our near. You know that better than anyone else. So that's like, you don't want to discuss those things, because it either means that the person does not understand, or she's like trying to fool you. So, well, I don't care, but that's the main point of all this. And I think your lens is using the reversed approach with central paraxial emmetropization more, and peripheral depth of focus. This morning was very interesting, because I had the patient who came to me, was 65, yes, and we did the Monovision trial. It was +2 each eye, and those patients, they are really demanding, because they lose excellent vision at distance and they become presbyopic, etc. So they become they were excellent at distance and near, and within 10 years they become completely spectacle dependent. And he didn't want monovision. So what I did is this dominant eye technique, where I shift the Q value toward more oblateness to induce more power in the periphery of the pupil. And he came this morning, and if my residents are online, they could witness this as well. He was 2015 Parino 3, which is like a Jagger 2, uncorrected. He had small pupil. It was 3 mm/0.5, I would say. But with bilateral positive spherical aberration induction, it was completely spectacle independent. It was thrilled. So sometimes this work on both sides, and I would say in my practice, women, and I'm on a slippery road here, so I'll be very, very cautious what I say, but usually they like more, because they are more clever than we are. They have a better brain plasticity. So in my experience, monovision or difference in power works better in women, but in men, sometimes they don't like monovision. And what I do is this bilateral emmetropization with a +Q change, and it works very well. Especially intermediate vision, they can drive the motorcycle, they see the dashboard, they can read their cell phone. The only thing where they are still spectacle dependent is when they need to read small print, but usually they don't read. So
you need a pair of glasses if you want to change the battery of your iPhone. You have these little screws in the iPhone, which is impossible to see. Aylin, I think we need to move on. Sorry.
Yeah, we need to move. Next speaker. Yeah,
Yep.
Graham Barrett. Okay.
I'd like to thank the organizers for the invitation to participate in this Oracle of Eye Innovations webinar, and also acknowledge a financial interest in that I have a patent on extended depth of focus intraocular lenses, which I've licensed to Rayner. Surgeons do have many choices today when selecting an intraocular lens, and one of the most important is the optical principle they think best addresses their patient's need for unaided near vision following cataract surgery. An understanding of the optical principles of the different lenses is important, as well as familiarity with clinical data, patient outcomes, and even an element of philosophy in choosing an appropriate lens. One of my interests is astronomy, where the optical quality of the telescope lens is critical. One can evaluate the quality of the optics by examining the image of a single star using the adjustable focus of the eyepiece, similar to the adjustable focus of the human lens. Intraocular lenses, of course, do not have an adjustable focus, and I recall vividly the excitement at the EIIC meeting in Copenhagen when the diffractive IOL was first presented as a solution to presbyopia following cataract surgery. I was one of the first surgeons to implant the 3M multifocal, but unfortunately the compromise in optical quality soon became apparent. With multifocals, the light energy is distributed to more than one focal plane, with a loss to higher orders, resulting in a Faustian bargain and compromise in optical quality. This degradation in image quality of a multifocal implant compared to a monofocal is quite evident in this comparison of actual images of a Snellen chart as published in the JCRS in 2007. Patients are said to adjust the loss of contrast by so-called neuroadaptation. This process, no doubt, is assisted by the fact that for many they have already become accustomed to poor contrast in vision due to the cataract, which then improves after surgery. Halos are unavoidable with a diffractive IOL, including trifocals, but do appear to be somewhat reduced with low-ad bifocal implants, as in this comparison published in 2015. Trifocal diffractive IOLs do provide some intermediate acuity compared to bifocal designs, but this focal range still lacks contrast compared to near and distance. It's not that impressive. Clinically, wavefront aberrometers are able to provide an estimate of the point spread or modulation transfer function, but underestimate the effect of scatter and dysphotopsia associated with multifocal lenses. Double-pass image visualization, however, is a useful device and provides a comprehensive optical quality analysis, including the MTF and scatter of different intraocular lenses implanted in patients. As you can see in this 18-year-old with a clear lens, the Strel ratio and MTF are high, the scatter index is low and unimpaired in the presence of a planar contact lens. When a diffractive echelon contact lens is placed on the same eye, both the Strel ratio and MTF decline, whilst the ocular scatter index increases significantly to 0.8. If a pure vision aspheric contact lens with spherical aberration providing a relatively high 2.5 diopter reading ad is then placed on the eye, you can see that the Strel ratio and MTF are reduced, but the scatter index remains relatively low. When I finally inserted an aspheric contact lens with a low reading ad of 1.5 diopters, the Strel ratio, MTF and scatter was indistinguishable from the control. And when I looked at the simulated Snellen chart of the low-ad aspheric versus the multifocal contact lens, it reminded me of the words of one of my favorite Rolling Stones songs, that sometimes you might find what you need, and indeed the concept of an extended depth of focus intraocular lens. The concept is simply to extend the single focus of a monofocal intraocular lens such as the Rayner Ray 1 to provide additional depth of focus as opposed to splitting the light rays as with a multifocal intraocular lens. It is possible to extend the depth of focus of an IOL with phase shift technology as used by Alcon, or with low-ad diffractive bifocal or trifocal IOLs produced by AMO and Zeiss respectively. You don't need to resort to diffractive optics, however, and incorporating spherical aberration in the optic of an intraocular lens is another method of extending depth of focus using negative, or preferably positive, spherical aberration. Pinhole optics can be used to enhance the depth of focus as used in IOLs produced by AcuFocus. And finally, a rotationally asymmetric optic can also be used to extend the depth of focus. When selecting an extended depth of focus IOL, it is important to remember that actually the human eye is not a telescope. It has a continuous focus, variable pupil, cortical filters to diminish chromatic aberration, and a retinal architecture with the Stiles-Crawford effect to compensate for spherical aberration. Positive spherical aberration has some unique characteristics, as you see in this comparison of an intraocular lens based on this principle compared to an aberration-free spherical IOL or a trifocal IOL. The additional depth of focus provides a balance between perfect resolution and adequate depth of focus. With added defocus, the Landau-C simulation is readable over a larger dioptric range, and the focus shifts slightly more myopic. The aspheric anterior surface has a unique optic design, with an inner optic zone that utilizes 4th and 6th order high-order positive spherical aberration, blending in an apodized fashion with the peripheral zone to extend depth of field without compromising visual acuity under low light conditions. This lens has been designed to meet the ANSI and ISO standards for a high-quality monofocal intraocular lens. Most informative is the defocus curve created by plotting the logmar acuity obtained with progressive defocus in a trial frame. This test can demonstrate an enhanced depth of focus and suggest clinical situations where this type of intraocular lens could prove to be useful. The positive aspheric IOL has a significant extended depth of focus when compared to the defocus curve of a standard negative aspheric IOL implanted in the other eye in the series of 18 patients. Using this data, it is evident that there is a considerable overlap of the distance eye and near eye when a modest level of myopia is targeted in one eye, creating the potential for so-called blended vision. The blend zone is even more impressive and greater if a positive aspheric IOL is implanted in both eyes. This type of lens is therefore well suited to modest monovision, as it increases the depth of focus, reduces the need for reading correction, and facilitates the potential for blended vision. The combined binocular defocus curve for modest monovision and the extended depth of focus intraocular lens is quite different to the previously published binocular defocus curve for a popular diffractive multifocal IOL. In particular, a positive aspheric IOL provides better intermediate acuity, which is important for so many of our daily activities. This lens may be an attractive alternative when distance vision is targeted in both eyes, as the unaided distance acuity with the lens is relatively unimpaired with minor levels of myopic defocus. I coined the term EDF, or extended depth of focus, almost a decade ago now, and now there are several lenses available in this category. The description does not describe a homogeneous group of intraocular lenses and designs, and features such as the presence or absence of dysphotopsia depends on the optical principles. The term does not describe a homogeneous group of intraocular lens designs, and issues such as the presence or absence of dysphotopsia depends on the optical principles. In addition, not all these intraocular lenses are well suited for use in combination with myopic defocus, as in monovision. Published data on uncorrected binocular acuity demonstrates that the Rayner EMV performs well in this comparison when both eyes are targeted for distance. The priority in this design is to maintain quality, and when I tested contrast sensitivity in a pilot clinical study, there was no significant loss of contrast sensitivity, either under photopic or mesopic conditions when compared to a control group with a standard negative spherical aberration, IOL. Glare and halos are not an issue with this type of lens design, and the Perth skyline at night does not show significant dysphotopsia with a monofocal lens or an EDF lens of this nature. This is quite unlike a multifocal or even an EDF IOL based on diffractive principles when viewing the same scene in the simulation. Although classified as extended depth of focus intraocular lenses, the category now includes low-ad bifocal and trifocal designs, where light scatter and dysphotopsia are still manifest. In addition, when a modest level of myopia is targeted to improve near vision, these designs are not optimized for myopic defocus. Dysphotopsia may increase, unlike the Rayner EMV. Choosing an optical solution to address presbyopia is a compromise between spectacle independence and unwanted symptoms, and in my opinion, an EDF IOL based on positive spherical aberration together with mini or modest monovision is a preferred solution. Multifocals may offer a greater chance of total spectacle independence, but the vision is less physiological, requiring monoptic suppression of conflicting images. The EDF principle provides better quality vision, particularly with respect to contrast and dysphotopsia. This is the reason why patient satisfaction is so high, in that you as a surgeon have a perfect hand and hold all the aces. An unhappy multifocal patient requiring lens exchange is something you read about, but do not need to experience. Nor do you need to spend significant chair time, as a solution of modest monovision with a positive spherical aberration IOL is suitable for the vast majority of patients. To end on a philosophical note, this optical solution is something that I suspect many surgeons will select for themselves, and bearing in mind the ethics of reciprocity, it's therefore worth considering for your patients. Thank you for your attention.
Thank you so much. Yes, there is a question from John. Yes.
Yeah, Graham, superb talk, beautifully illustrated, etc. I just wonder, to sum up with another Stone's quote, how many of your patients would say, "I can't get no satisfaction"?
Not mine, John. Not mine.
Super talk. I loved it.
Not with monovision, John.
Well, you know, I will give this up sometime, but fortunately, I still don't need my cataracts done. Not that.
Sure.
So we already overload, we passed the time at the moment. If there is any more question, I will close. It was really wonderful presentation. It
Aylin,
was very informative. Yes.
sorry, we have the wine webinar video. Wine
Yeah.
of the webinar video. Yep.
I mean, this I will close.
Oh,
this.
okay.
Yeah. So
I just have a question. What time is it in Australia for Graham now? I'm curious.
I'll be on my bedtime. It is 1:15, Damien.
Wow.
It's not so,
Wow.
not so.
We appreciate that.
Yeah.
Thank you, Graham.
Time for
Fantastic
astronomy, Graham. Time for astronomy
Thank you,
observation.
Graham.
wonderful presentation, really very informative.
Yeah, super.
So if there is no comment, no question, we will move to wine session now.
Okay, and if you want me to introduce this, Aylin, so we're going to fly out to Napa, quite literally, and join Gerd Auffarth and Vance Thompson in this episode of Wine of the Webinar.
Vance, this is Gerd. I'm very excited, and I got a couple of bottles from you. Thank you so much. It came here safely, and I put them actually in my wine cellar in a specific refrigerator for wine, and put them on the right temperature. And I'm very excited now, and want to see. Maybe you can explain to us what you sent to me, and then I really love to taste it together with you, and let's talk about it.
Well, thank you, Gerd, and I'm absolutely honored to do this, and want to thank Chris also for organizing and inviting us. What a delightful event! And I just finished a lot of surgery this week, and now I'm out in the Napa Valley, where we've been in the wine business for about 20 years, and you know, it's maybe the scientists in us. I think a lot of people in ophthalmology and in medicine in general, you know, are attracted to the science of fermentation and everything that goes along with the wine world. And it's interesting, Gerd, my best friend from medical school and I bought a little winery that was, you know, kind of hurting. You know, a little over 20 years ago, and we invited in some partners along the way as we grew, and we have a couple other people from actually the wine business, I'm sorry, the ophthalmology business actually, that are involved with us. Jim Mazo, Eric Donenfeld, and Carrie Solomon are also involved in our wine business, and we have really focused on a direct-to-consumer experience in our little tasting room. And maybe as we taste the wines, we can talk about that a little bit more. But we're going to be tasting 3 of our wines. Our Sauvignon Blanc, made from our handwritten wines, called The Author. And we're also going to have our 2018 Merlot, that is from our Jessup Cellars, and our 2017 Jewel, which is a Merlot-based blend. I like to think of it like a Pomerol, and you know, just kind of a nice little example of the wines that we have.
Great, I'm really looking forward to that. And it's interesting to know, because also I know some friends in Germany, a colleague from Karlsruhe who owns a winery. He inherited it, but still is also very active in that. So yeah, maybe we have some connections. Maybe that's because of being a scientist, being a doctor, or maybe being just somebody who just likes good things.
Yes, yes.
So I think the Napa Valley is, I mean, everybody knows is one of the most famous regions, especially in the US,
yes,
for wine. So can you tell us a little bit about what's so special about that? Why is the wine so good from there?
Well, you know, for one, the location is very special. Being in California in the northern part, not too far from the Pacific Ocean, and also having the San Francisco and San Pablo Bay at its southern end, it has some very interesting weather characteristics. It's known for being a Mediterranean climate, which less than 2% of the Earth's surface is known for the cool nights and the warm days of a Mediterranean climate. And for the wine world, those warm days are so important, as you know, for developing the sugars that eventually get converted to alcohol. But also what's so important to create balance in wine is the acidity. And so those cool nights, allowing those vines to rest and developing that acid that is so important to balance. Because if you're in a warm region of the world with warm nights, you can get your wine grapes to ripen, but you're not going to get the acidity. And then you're doing acid additions and you're starting to play with Mother Nature. And that's why these Mediterranean climates become so valuable. The real estate becomes very expensive, actually, because it's such a natural way to grow big, bold, balanced wines. And the Napa Valley is only a sixth of the size of Bordeaux. And so being a teeny region, it still has over half of the world's soils in it. So it makes for a very diverse climate. It also has various elevations, and you know how, you know, drainage is so important to the wine world. And so hillside fruit can be very valuable, but there's also areas such as, you know, the Rutherford Bench that isn't so much of an elevation, but just has the beautiful drainage of an elevation and some of the world's most expensive vineyard property. But what's also interesting about the Napa Valley is the southern part near the San Pablo Bay is the coolest part.
Mm-hmm.
And the northern part near Calistoga, because the Napa Valley goes from Napa, the town of Napa, to the northern part, Calistoga, is the warmest part. So it's kind of the opposite of what you would think. North warmest, south coolest.
Mm-hmm.
When it comes to the northern hemisphere, that's, you know, unusual. And so the southern part of the Napa Valley actually grows some Burgundian varietals rather nicely, nice Chardonnay and Pinot. We've also experimented with some cool weather growing of Cabernet and Merlot there too, especially on some sun-facing vineyards that has made for some interesting Bordeaux varietals, but in general, a Burgundian type region in the southern part of the Napa Valley. And then as you go north, it's a Bordeaux growing region. The big five Bordeaux varietals just grow gloriously here, and it's just a wonderful wine growing region.
Mm. They say that the Merlot has very close ties to the Bordeaux in terms how it is. So it sounds like that it's also related to the specific region of the Napa Valley. If both grapes are really growing so nicely there.
Well, and we all pay homage to France, where a lot of you know, the winemaking techniques and a lot of wine history comes from, and for sure the Merlot grape. I actually, Gerd, think of Merlot as what we age Cabernet to become. The tannins become, you know, more longer and velvetier in an aged Cabernet, whereas Merlot has a tendency to get there more quickly, but also ages beautifully. But the softness of Merlot is something that I just love, and I consider it literally one of the world's most glorious varietals.
Mm. They say that the Merlot grape is a little bit different. It's a little bit bigger, has a kind of thinner skin than some of the others. So would you attribute especially the smoothness a little bit to that, let's say, anatomy of the grape?
Definitely. And I think it's also why it's a grape that is sensitive to the farming characteristics. And I think one of the things the Napa Valley tries to do is low yield, because great wine, as our winemaker has taught me, is grown. Mm-hmm. And so if you go into a Merlot vineyard that is destined to create 12 to 15 tons of fruit per acre, will drop, you know, 75% of that fruit. And so we're going for more like 2 to 4 tons per acre, so that all that great stuff from photosynthesis and everything that's happening in the vine is concentrated into less fruit. And I think that Merlot became so popular in the 70s and 80s that in the United States anyway, it was over-farmed, and it started to just not respect its characteristics, and it started to become maybe even a little less respected. Mm-hmm. And, you know, I don't know if you ever saw the movie Sideways, but it was amazing to me, the power of a movie. You know, the famous saying, which I can't say on here about what he said about Merlot, ended up being because it was his ex-wife's who had, you know, divorced him. It was her favorite wine. So he had something very much against Merlot. Mm-hmm. And our Merlot sales with that movie went down. And it was amazing to me, the power of media. And you're, I remember in our tasting room, we just had this beautiful Merlot that was, low yield created, bold, beautiful flavors, and people wouldn't even want to try it. And then when we would talk them into try it, they're like, I love it. So we ended up making the blend that you're going to taste called Jewel, the Merlot-based blend. We thought, let's make a blend. And so people would say, when we'd ask if they want to try our Merlot, they'd say, oh, no, thank you. Well, would you like to try our blend, Jewel? Oh, sure. And they'd taste it and they loved it. But the point was that the movie had, and the over farming, I think, had kind of hurt Merlot, but farming principles matter so very much.
Do you think that because of the smoothness and the raw, it's kind of easy drinking wine in a way, Merlot, as you describe it now, is it more is it preferred also by women more, or is that not really right to say?
Yeah, I would,
because you said the wife was their favorite wine.
Yeah, no, I think it's a really an interesting thought. I do think Merlot has more feminine characteristics than Cabernet, but I think it's an amazingly food friendly wine that men enjoy also very much, and so I don't know if I would say I've seen that women enjoy Merlot more, but I would agree that it has softer characteristics.
So before we talk too much, I think we should go into action and try. So
should we try the white first?
We can start with the white.
It's whatever order you like.
Yeah, we start with white. I can show it here in the camera.
Yeah.
I think it is a very nice, almost handicraft. I think handwritten is written on it. It's a 2020. The author, that's what it calls. It looks really nice. I think we should give the people the opportunity, if they want to buy it or to access it, to give some information, maybe on the webpage or so, where you can get it. Let's try it. Yeah.
This handwritten wines, you know how precious a handwritten note is in this day and age. Well, our wines are all, using old world handmade techniques, and we thought there was just a lot of theming we could do with the name handwritten. And this wine is one of my favorite whites. And we have our own vineyard, but we also lease vineyards, and that's very common in the Napa Valley, especially as you grow. But this is an estate Sauvignon Blanc grown at our vineyard, and I would say that one of the things I love about it is its texture. Because you get the classic, tropical fruit aromas, that you get from, a nice Sauvignon Blanc. But you also get, not only besides the nice acidity, this creaminess. And it's because of the way it's fermented in a concrete egg. So we do some Sauvignon Blanc in stainless steel. We do some in oak.
Yeah.
And we actually do this in a concrete egg. And it's supposed to bring some, wonderful creaminess to a Sauv Blanc that actually starts to also, besides being something you would enjoy on the back porch on a summer day, that is very food friendly. And what do you think of this, Gerd?
Yeah, well, it looks very nice. And when I smell it, it really gives this feeling of tropical fruit. Yeah. I don't know, from pineapple through, it really has a more tropical touch for me compared to like the German white wines. Yeah, it's really
right.
Yeah.
Our winemaker, he's respects also the Sauvignon Blancs of the South Island of New Zealand, the North End, and he tries to emulate some of the Sauvignon Blancs of that region. And but this is a 100% Sauvignon Blanc. And, you know, we have experimented with blends of different vessels with the stainless steel oak and concrete egg. This one happens to be 100% fermented in a concrete egg.
Mm. When you have like oak, you can smell sometimes this. How does a concrete egg smell when you?
Well,
I don't know how I can describe that actually.
Yep. It wouldn't, you know, impart really any smell. It mainly is texture. And even with the oak, oftentimes what you'll smell has a little bit to do with the, you know, type of oak. Our winemaker calls oak his spice rack, you know, and, you know, we use mainly French, Hungarian, and American oak for different reasons. And so sometimes oak can be very neutral also, but it's just such a beautiful vessel to age and create wine in. But there's not really a smell that comes from this.
Yeah. For those who are not so familiar with wines, when we smell the wine, we have like 3 types of aromas. First, we usually smell the kind of fruity type of thing in a wine coming from the grape itself. The second aroma is more or less a little bit associated with the manufacturing process, more yield or something in it. And then the third aroma would be maybe coming from a specific oak, some nuts or even whatever kind of woody type of things you smell. So these are the 3 types of aroma you can smell when you look at a wine.
Yeah.
I think that's actually part of enjoying a wine to explore that even before you drink it.
Right.
It's an interesting.
I agree.
Yeah. So
that sensory analysis of looking at the wine and then smelling, because the olfactory sense is 70% of wine tasting.
Yeah.
And then tasting and enjoying not only some of the physical characteristics that are happening. So if we like to talk about the long finish and those types of things, but also the different flavors that you're tasting, and not to overthink it. I think wine is meant to be enjoyed. It's a wonderful catalyst to conversation. I consider it a great extension of food. Probably the majority of wine I have is with food.
So talking about that, what kind of food would be your favorite food with that, or what? Yeah, what would be the most frequent food where you would take this handwritten wine?
Yeah. So I think this is a beautiful wine with, you know, kind of whatever you're going to begin the evening with, you know, the wonderful prosciuttos and cheeses and fruits that maybe before you dive into your salad course. I think this would go right through the salad course just fine and into a nice fish or chicken. I don't necessarily have this with red meat, but I will say that it's personal preference. There's no hard and fast rule. That if you're someone who prefers white wine with meat, that's just fine. But for me, it's more the, you know, earlier part of the meal, but it can pair so nicely with a nice fish also.
And mostly like more Mediterranean type of starters, so to say. What would you say that? Yeah.
Right.
Great. Okay, thank you very much, Vance. I think that was an exciting session we had, and great wine tasting. And I can assure you, I will not stop with it. Yeah, even when we finish the seminar, I will continue, and it's really worth it. And I'm really looking forward for the next time we meeting up. And I say cheers again I know it's difficult to. Yeah. Okay. Let's put it this way. And again, thank you very much for this.
Well, Gerd, it absolutely amazes me how Zoom can bring us together from two separate parts of the world, and just how your brilliant scientific mind that's helped us so much in ophthalmology, just the questions you asked about wine just shows me the depth of understanding you have in so many areas. And thank you so much, and cheers to you, my friend.
Okay.
Yeah.
Cheers.
Okay.
Wonderful.
Yeah,
That
that
was
was I have to say that was one of the most fun conversations I've ever had with those two. There's actually two more wines that they get through that we have to look forward to, though. The next time out, they will be drinking local German wine. So, but their encyclopedic knowledge of wine is a little terrifying. So, yeah. All right. So I think we're going to wrap up now.
Yeah, I think I would like to thank everybody for staying that long, and hope you're enjoying your weekend wherever you are, and looking forward to see you very soon. Thank you very much.
Yeah, we'll be back in August for the next webinar number 8.
And then, bye. Super.
Bye-bye.
Thank you, everybody. Thank you. Bye-bye.
Bye.
Bye.